All right, my friends, welcome back to Barriers and Boundaries Resilience Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, EB, and today, very excited to have Csaba Toth with me today, having a conversation on leadership. And I have been in a lot of organizations, I've seen a lot of frameworks, and a lot of those frameworks really come packaged. They really come prepared and a one size fits all. But one of the things that I've seen from Csaba is the ability to recognize that there are differences and there are layers and there are different levels. And sometimes you just got to meet people where they're at. And I don't want to steal a lot of his thunder, but just really excited about making sense of leadership and the ability to engage at the right level in the right way. We'll get into ICQ Global. We'll get into uncommon sense and unusual times, and just a whole great conversation I think we're going to have today about the cognitive diversity. Just there was just so many things when I started preparing for this podcast and having him as a guest that I got really excited about. So hopefully, it just recalls all the things that he's gone to school for. And Csaba, just welcome to the show, man.
Thank you so much for having me and being passionate about the topic that is really dear to me. So thank you again.
Yeah. So where are you at today? Not just physically, but talking about ICQ Global Disc. Where do you want to start today with unpacking this conversation about leadership?
I think we could start with uncommon sense because a lot of people know about common sense and they demand it and they adore when somebody has common sense. But what is it exactly? Usually it means that if you think like me, then you have common sense. So what I really like is that you're similar to me. And if you think about it, this is one of the strongest forces in team dynamics. It's called homophilic diversity. It does sound like a disease, but it just means that we like and trust people who are similar to us because it's easy to get along. We can run on autopilot and the brain loves that. So we can force people to say that I celebrate diversity, but by definition, it means unpredictability. And that is the last thing that the brain wants, which is also great because once I understand it and I embrace reality, instead of denying it, I know what the solution is. The more I understand myself, and now the more I understand other people who think and behave differently, the more predictable, the more familiar they become. And now the brain likes it. Now we can turn differences into synergy instead of painful liability. But that's not easy. It's not based on common sense and good intention. But luckily, there is a blueprint, and that's exactly what we specialize in.
This goes deeper than, hey, what is your favorite football team? This is your behaviors that we're talking about, right?
I think you're absolutely right that the first obstacle is often visible difference. Because if I don't like you or you look weird, then I think, oh, something is suspicious. That's not ideal. But most of the relationships don't break down because of that. They break down because we disagree, because you have a different opinion, because you do something that goes against my values. It triggers a really intense emotional response, and I don't even know what happened because it is so obviously wrong that I cannot even explain it. So why would I want to be with you? Why would I want to work with you? We shouldn't hang out. And this is where case is closed. When you have this feeling that you're talking to someone and you think, wow, that person has no common sense at all, then it's more than likely that they feel the same way about you for a different reason. The level of pain is the same. The reason is different. And that's exactly what we can learn how to bridge this mindset gap.
I've heard before that emotional pain is almost no different or no different at all than physical pain in some regards in the brain. Have you experienced that or heard that or studied that?
Yes, so very similar area lights up in the brain, and that's why painkillers work for emotional pain as well, which is not necessarily good news, but that's why it can lead to addiction, yes.
The aspect of isolation that occurs in a workplace, how does a leader prevent that? How do we build an organizational culture that doesn't allow that or tries to prevent that as much as possible? What's the conversation you're going to have with a leader to say, hey, here's what you should think about if you really want to try to prevent that sort of isolation?
What is your definition of isolation, or would you have an example what you mean by that?
You got a new worker coming in, someone that's new to the team. How do you want them to feel included from the beginning?
Right. Okay. So it is definitely part of it. And I think one of the main issues is exactly what the MIT Sloan Management Review revealed, because they were researching how come most of the leadership programs provide negative ROI. It's not that they don't work, but they cost money. So they can cause more harm than good. And there's no benefit. How's that possible? So what they found, that was, I think, 2024, that often the evaluation is based on how informative or how entertaining the program was. And sometimes people make a decision based on packaging, almost like a corporate Tinder profile. Looks good, so let's buy it. But nobody measures the impact on the people. And that's a problem. So that is an answer to your question, because if you are a leader and you think that everything goes well, everything is fine, then why would you look for a solution if you don't have a problem? If you don't have a data, then you have to rely on assumptions. And usually they have nothing to do with reality, especially on a leadership level, because of course the people are going to filter the information. They're not going to share the negative ones. So they think that everything is fine. And often that is the problem. But at the same time, we also have to understand the different cultural backgrounds and personality types, because sometimes when you ask people, what do you need to feel included? And the answer can be wide ranging. Because maybe if I join a company and then you come to me and you say, oh, where are you from? What's your story? Then I think, whoa, you're a bit creepy. Just can you keep the distance? And other people would love it. Same behavior can be seen as positive or negative. And this is where cultural intelligence becomes important. And this is exactly where common sense and good intention can backfire so badly.
Culture intelligence. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that?
So if you Google it, then you will find a lot of country briefing, 5 do's and don'ts in different countries. And this is what you have to do if you meet an American. That's how German people behave, which is very basic version of that. So international differences is not a synonym for cultural intelligence, because we all belong to 15 or 20 cultural groups at the same time. That's your gender, generation, country of origin, hobby, religion, profession, corporate culture, a lot of different programs, a lot of groups. So imagine that you talk to someone, even in your own family. What are the chances that they belong to the same 15 or 20 culture groups at the same time? It's pretty much zero. So once we understand this, then we realize that every single conversation is a cross-cultural dialogue, and every single team is multicultural, even if it's not international. So cultural intelligence is not for international teams. It's for all of us, even at home. It's about understanding how somebody's personality type and cultural background influence how they make sense of the world. That would be the easiest definition. So I think we can simplify the topic a little bit, because technically there are 2 big forces squeezing us, corporate America as well. One is the AI revolution, because this is what you can hear about everywhere, that robots are taking over everything and they are going to take your jobs and everything. And in some cases, that's true. And on the other side, the collective term for that is uncertainty. That is just increasing really quickly. So obviously, the companies need to transform. Even if they don't want to, they have to. Otherwise, the result is predictable. Now, if you look at the transformations, more than 70% of them fail because of people. But less than 5% of the budget and resources go to people, the human side of transformation, which makes no sense. So imagine that you are in charge, you facilitate the transformation, and you have a 70% of chance that you're going to fail. That's not ideal. The stakes are high, the risk is yours. So how can we reduce that risk? And that's exactly what we do. The reason why a lot of people don't focus on the human side is because often it's invisible and they react to something that they can see. But you can adjust the symptoms. That's not going to fix the root causes. But you cannot blame them. That's all they know. Or maybe sometimes they have the engagement scores. But what they don't understand is that often the most engaged team is the most resistant to change, because that shows the energy, how much they love what they have right now, not how much they want to change it or how able they are to change it. There's nothing to do with that. So they invest a lot of money in technology, and probably they are going to fail because of that. And that's exactly what we specialize in. We can measure the 3 invisible forces and then 9 biomarkers directly linked to engagement, profit, and growth. How ready they are to transform. These are the biomarkers of high performance. You cannot see them, but definitely you can feel if something is wrong. But if you don't have the vocabulary, if you don't have a frame of reference and data, how do you talk about it? All you can say is that I don't like Tiffany because she's annoying. Well, fantastic. And then what happens after that? Nothing. That's not going to solve the problem. So how do we create meaningful conversations driven by data and rooted in science? That is important. So first we measure it. We measure the team dynamics, the quality of the culture. And then we also provide people with the blueprint of why people think and behave differently. Because you're right that we are all unique. That is true. But we are predictably different. That's also true. So there is a blueprint. And that's why I lost my first company. That's when I started my research. And that's what I discovered. And that is the foundation of ICP Global. That's how Global Disc was born.
If you're going into a company today and you're sitting down with a leader, what's the first conversation you want to have with somebody?
First, we have to find the person who is responsible for the success of the company. And it sounds really obvious, but most of the time that's not the case. It's not necessarily HR, maybe it's not that leader, maybe it's somebody else. So the reason is that data can be offensive or empowering. It depends on your self-esteem as well. And sometimes virtual signaling is much cheaper and easier than finding a solution. Because imagine that you are in a room and it's absolutely pitch dark. And then you bump into everything and you try to get out, but you just hurt yourself. It's not pleasant. Then you switch on the light and you can see the mess around you. It's not pretty, but it's much easier to get out. And our assessments are exactly like that. They don't create more problems. They make them visible so you can deal with them. You can bury your hand in the sand. It's not going to be easier.
There was a oh gosh, it was a movie, it was over like 20 years ago, the I, Robot movie with Will Smith, and there was a line in that movie, and oh gosh, it was he's talking to the girl, and she's just in denial of the I'll call it the data in this point, and about the robot's true behavior. And he's like, "You are the dumbest smart person I've ever met." And sometimes like that might be the case with a leader that's just in denial of what the data is actually saying.
I think this is logical. And yes, it's true, but it's definitely not normal. The reason why I'm saying it is because, for example, 95% of our actions are driven by values and beliefs we are not even aware of. But we think that we are so logical and objective. That's just not true because we don't learn about this at school. So we try to explain the world based on what we know and what we understand. You cannot explain something that you're not aware of. And often that is a problem. That's why we focus on the surface level. That's why we focus on our own narrative. And we have to protect this narrative. We have to protect the ego. So that means that we want to be right instead of getting things right. Because if I admit that I'm wrong, then the world becomes even more uncertain and I cannot have it. So, even if you look at the political environment, you're not going to convince people that, you voted for the wrong person. They're not going to admit it. There's no point in talking about it. I can't remember which also was the one who said that it's much easier to fool people than to convince them that they got fooled. They're not going to admit
Mm,
it. And that is the cognitive dissonance that, the facts don't distract people. They have this agenda and they have this tunnel vision. And this is the interesting part, that they have this clarity, but often that clarity comes from a tunnel vision rather than from the quality and quantity of information around them. But it feels very similar. So they are convinced.
yeah. Yeah. How do we understand the culture cleanly? What is the real narrative?
So I think there's a more simple definition. I cannot remember who said it, but that corporate culture is the behavior that you reward and punish. You can put all your values on the wall, it doesn't mean anything, because how many companies say that, oh, we love people and we love innovation, and then you make a mistake and bam, they slap you in the face. Then clearly those are not the values that drive that behavior. And quickly we learn, don't make a mistake. Don't report anything. So psychological safety is ruined. Fantastic. So that's culture. So in a way, there's a huge overlap between the individuals and the companies as well, because you cannot optimize something unless you know how it works. And most people have no idea how their own mindset works. And just like companies have no idea about their own culture. So if the starting point is not precise, how can you plan a journey? How can you have a transformation? If the starting point is wrong, incorrect, that's a problem. That's not going to be successful. And where do you want to get to? A better place. You can type it in GPS, I want to go to a better place. Well, off you go. That's not going to work. And that is the difference between change, which is external and reactive, versus transitioning. That's intentional and internal. I know where I am. I know where I want to get to. Doesn't mean that it cannot change, but it's much more intentional. So people can get on board. But when they don't have the information and the decisions are based on assumptions that, wow, people love it. They love AI because everybody completed the programs. Yeah, but compliance doesn't mean engagement, doesn't mean commitment. That's not the same thing. So often these are the problems, that they look at the surface level and they don't understand the mechanics of that.
Was growth mindset a big part of your mindset going into how you want leaders to think when they engage with you?
Yes and no. I mean, I think the best solutions are born out of pain and suffering, and that's how Global This was born. And you asked about my story, and that's how I started. So as soon as I finished the university, I started a company in the UK. It was a restaurant booking site. You book a table, we get the money, but it was more exciting than that. We started with 35 restaurants in Brighton. In 1 year, we had 5,500 all of the UK. It turned into a joint venture. And on paper, it looked fantastic. In reality, not at all. I couldn't work with the other CEO, who was French. We got to the point where we had to get out of the business. We sold the shares. It is still online, but we are not involved anymore. And this is when I started my research, because I didn't understand how come I had years of experience. Even my dissertation was about the exact topic, Eastern and Western European joint ventures. The department where I studied is number one in the world. in its category. Harvard is number 2 on that list. How come I couldn't put that theory into practice? So I got certified in a lot of psychometric leadership, interculture models, and I wanted to understand what went wrong and how we could fix it. And my assumption was that if all of these methodologies are or were correct, there must be a huge overlapping part. There must be a structure beneath the surface. As it turned out, there is, and that's how global disc was born. So that's why this is important. So this was the starting point. Then we had to realize that at the end of the day, because you asked about the active and passive, that we are all a combination of the 4 personality types. Yes, but we were conditioned differently by our environment. So technically, your personality type determines how you want to behave, but your environment determines how you have to behave. That's why you can never ever separate them. We don't exist in isolation. So taking a psychometric assessment on its own is fantastic, but also misleading. It's not going to predict anything. We have to understand the power of the environment. So when it comes to growth mindset, probably I had it. But the interesting thing is that even Carol Dweck said, who coined the term, that you can have off-the-chart growth mindset. But if your environment is not nurturing, it's not psychologically safe, it has zero benefit. Zero. Is that important?
That is a very key element not to be overlooked.
I think the biggest distance between two people is misunderstanding, and that is part of it as well. So often the problem is that you said that the people are important and leadership, and yes, of course it's true. But at the end of the day, the leaders and the stakeholders, they need to make money. So the language they speak is money. We can package it differently,
Sure.
but at the end of the day, it's about money,
Yeah.
not people. So there is a disconnect. But we can connect it. We can bridge it. You don't have to choose between money and people, because the easiest way in to a company is when I have a chat with them and I ask them, do you know what psychological safety is? And then often they say something about comfort and things like that. No, it is the number 1 trait of high performing teams. Number 1. That's the Google research. Okay, really? I didn't know that. So where is your team on that dimension? Psychological safety. What would be the percentage? No idea. Okay, so where was your team before you invested in a program? And where was your team after that? No idea. Would it make sense to know that? Because we can measure those biomarkers with the same discipline as finance or operations. And yes, this is relatively new. So maybe they are not aware that it exists. And probably if they have suppliers, then they give them what they have, not necessarily what they need. And that's also a problem. But that's an ethical issue. And that's how we can get in. So this is when they understand that if you create the right environment where people feel safe, where they feel motivated, and there's also cognitive diversity, that's the highest level of growth. It's proven beyond doubt. So would it make sense to know your data? And that's how we can get
Of
in.
course. Is there a way for organizations to hire better, knowing this type of information is out there?
I think it's a two-way street. And it's also interesting because I talk to a lot of recruiters, and sometimes they get really passionate about psychometric assessments and this and that. I said, fantastic. So you're profiling them really hard. Yes. But do you know where they are going to go to? Do you have any data about the team, the leader? Because everything is relative. Everything is compared to something. It's not about the absolute score. And that's absolutely missing. So I said, you're not talking about matching, because matching would imply that you understand both sides. And just imagine that you're profiling a flower and you know everything about that flower. You're the best at it. But where do you put it? In the middle of the desert? In the snow? In the middle of the jungle? Or in the right environment? Depending on where you put it, you're going to get a very different outcome. So that is one side. But the other side of the story is that
That's great, by the way. That's really great, by the way. I love that.
it's disturbingly accurate. But on the other side of that, there is the individual, because since pandemic, people realized that, it was almost like a wake-up call that I'm not putting up with these toxic environments. And now companies are hurting enough to pay attention, because if people are leaving, if they are disengaged, they're not going to make money. It's that simple. So now they are more forced to create an inclusive environment. Now, that's the problem with that. They send the leaders to inclusive behavior programs. They complete it, they come back, and then now I'm really inclusive. Are you? Do you have the data? Because if I'm a member of your team and I don't feel included, you're not an inclusive leader. It's that simple. But you might think that you are doing the right thing, and it's just not true. But if I don't feel included, I'm not going to share my ideas. I'm not going to collaborate. I'm not going to innovate. And you think that you don't have a problem, but you actually do, a big one. That's the problem with it. So yes, we have to focus on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, what role does accountability play in that too?
What do you mean by that?
Let's say you want to take a look year over year of how the team's cognitive diversity, are they thinking towards change together, or are they just really trying to stay in the same lane and do the same thing over and over again? Is there a leadership responsibility for holding a team accountable? I mean, I guess it kind of depends on the vision of the organization or the mission of the team.
So I think there's a step before that. So we have two assessments. One is global disc, which is about the individual, the blind spot, the cognitive diversity. The other one is growth zone that measures psychological safety and motivation, the team dynamics and the quality of the culture. So that would be the first one. And the reason is that you have to create the right environment first. That is step one. That is the foundation. Because imagine that you have a lot of cognitive diversity. That just means that you have a lot of different opinions. But if you don't have the right environment, that's going to turn into a bloodbath because you just disagree with everyone and you're not going, you get offended and
Sounds like fun. That sounds like a lot of fun to me.
yeah, not innovation, definitely. And I think that happens a lot. And that's why it's so rare. And we have so many case studies where you have a bunch of very different looking people who think the same way, which is good for marketing, not good for innovation. But who's responsible that is? I think step one, create the right environment, and then you can increase it. And I think that's the problem with the D&I field as well, that the topic itself is extremely important, even more than before. But I think that the field itself lost credibility because there was everything about diversity, especially in the visible layer, and there was nothing about inclusion, which is, let's be honest, that is the invisible force that unlocks the benefits of diversity. Without that, it turns into painful liability. And at the end of the day, cognitive diversity is the only layer that has proven benefit in terms of performance. Just because we look different, it doesn't mean that it adds value to a team. If you have different opinions, different perspectives, we see the same situation from different perspectives, and we make it work, then we can make better decisions. But that's difficult.
There's so many different outcomes to every scenario, and what's going to be best for the organization, the team, the person, the employee. But yeah, you're right. You have to have the environment first to really be able to explore those different avenues. That's really good. So, Chab, I want to thank you for your time today. This has just been a great conversation.
Happy to connect with anyone on LinkedIn so they can find me, definitely. Then the website is called gamechangers.icq.com. This is where we have most of the solutions, including our AI coach and all the assessments in the Intelligence Hub. It's not necessarily about me, but it's about our mission, and that's about making sense of the world. And that is more important than ever before. Because I think if we had learned about this at school, it would be a very different world now. But fortunately, we didn't. And this topic shouldn't be the privilege of the corporate training. This is something that we have to learn every day. And at the same time, it starts with us. So, when it comes to uncommon sense, a lot of people want to learn about how to manage other people, how to change them. And that's not the right attitude. First, let's understand who I am, how I work, my own mindset. Then I can optimize it. And maybe other people will make more sense as well. And we can get better results with less hassle. And that's all we want.
Oh, that's great. And I'll have links in the description below as well. Chaba, again, thanks so much for your time. And man, I look forward to seeing even more great work and what is developing with you. And man, keep studying, man. I love focusing on the education and being able to help us figure out who we are and what we can do and help us build more confidence in our culture and our cultural intelligence. So thanks, Chaba. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Hi, my friends. That was Java. What a great conversation. And I really want to double down on that piece about the environment, being a leader that creates that environment where your people can be resilient. I'm really thrilled about the opportunity that he can bring to your organization, him and his team, and the global disc. Check out the information that he has. Reach out to him, start up a conversation. And that's what we did. And it just went really well. So keep fighting the good fight, keep striving for resilient. And until next time, EB out here.